They were friends of my family, older, graceful, and unexpectedly close. One afternoon, they asked me for help, and everything changed. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the living room where my family's friends had gathered. The room smelled faintly of fresh flowers, mingled with the aroma of brewed coffee that lingered from the morning. I was leaning against the doorway, carrying a box of old photo albums, when I noticed two women from our family's friend circle approaching me. They were both in their early 40s, confident, graceful, and quietly magnetic in a way that made you notice every subtle movement. One had a gentle elegance, the kind that made people feel immediately at ease, and the other carried herself with a poised warmth, her smile soft yet inviting. They were familiar faces, yes, but seeing them like this, closer, more present, made my heart skip in a way I couldn't quite name. "Could you help us bring a few things inside?" one of them asked, her voice calm, warm, with a hint of laughter tucked into the corners. It was the kind of voice that made you want to say yes before your brain even caught up. I nodded quickly, aware of my own slightly fluttering chest, and followed them toward the porch. As we moved, the air between us was light but charged in the quietest way. I carried a small stack of cushions while one of them guided me, her hand brushing mine ever so slightly as she reached for a pillow. The contact was fleeting, but enough to leave a lingering warmth on my skin. I found myself acutely aware of the way her fingers felt, slender, reassuring, casual, and the faint scent of her perfume, a soft floral that somehow made the summer air feel heavier, more intimate. We passed through the sliding door into the living room, and for a moment, our movements slowed. There was an almost unspoken rhythm. I lifted a box, she gestured toward the couch. I adjusted a blanket, and she offered a quiet nod of thanks. Their presence was comforting, yet I couldn't shake the tiny thrill that ran through me whenever our hands met even accidentally, when our shoulders brushed as we reached for the same object. Inside, the light shifted again, falling across the wooden floor in soft patterns. I noticed the way one of the women tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the sunlight catching her eyes and making them seem even warmer. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. Instead, I focused on the steady cadence of my heartbeat, the way it quickened slightly whenever our eyes met. I realized, almost reluctantly, that this simple request, to help them carry things inside, felt charged with more than just polite familiarity. It was a quiet, gentle nudge into a space I hadn't expected to occupy, close, attentive, aware in a way that made my chest tighten and my mind swirl with unspoken questions. And in that brief, ordinary moment, I felt the first stirrings of something that neither time nor propriety could easily ignore. We moved further into the house, each of us carrying different items from the porch. I had a small stack of blankets tucked under one arm, careful not to drop them, while they guided me toward the living room, pointing out where each thing should go. The ordinary task felt suddenly intimate, the kind of closeness that made me hyper-aware of every subtle touch, every glance. The first brush of hands came when I reached for a cushion at the same moment as one of them. Our fingers touched lightly, and I felt a small, electric pulse run up my arm. She gave a small, knowing smile, almost imperceptible, and I wondered for a moment if she had felt it too. The contact was fleeting, casual, but I couldn't shake the warmth it left lingering on my skin. Walking side by side through the hallway, I noticed details I had never really paid attention to before. The soft sway of her hair as she moved, the delicate curve of her wrist when she adjusted a sleeve, the quiet rhythm of her breathing as she spoke to the other woman. There was a grace in the way they navigated the space together, an easy confidence that contrasted with the nervous awareness blooming inside me. I felt small, young, and yet for some reason, trusted. When we paused to set down a heavier box on the table, our shoulders brushed. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but enough to make my chest tighten. I became aware of the gentle heat radiating from her body, the faint perfume that clung to her, and the reassuring steadiness of her hand as she adjusted the box with me. Each subtle motion felt layered with meaning I wasn't supposed to read into, yet I couldn't help it. As we moved around the room, our paths intersected naturally, bringing us closer than I would have imagined in a normal social setting. One of them stepped slightly closer to offer guidance with the placement of a cushion, and the warmth of her arm nearly brushing mine made me pause, just long enough to notice how soft the fabric of her sweater felt against my fingertips. The air between us seemed charged, not with overt desire, but with the quiet awareness that we were sharing space in a way that mattered. The second woman leaned slightly toward me to point out where a rug should go, her elbow almost grazing mine. I caught the faintest smile on her lips, and for a moment, the ordinary act of arranging furniture felt like an unspoken dialogue. We were communicating through proximity, through the rhythm of our movements, and through fleeting touches that were never intrusive, yet impossibly intimate. By the time we had set everything in place, I felt a quiet, thrilling exhaustion. My chest was full of unspoken words, small shivers of anticipation, and a growing awareness of how profoundly present they were, both physically and emotionally. It was an ordinary task transformed into something charged and tender, a slow, careful dance of closeness that neither time nor propriety had prepared me for. And in that simple, shared space, I realized that the day had already begun to change, shifting from mundane family gathering into the subtle unfolding of something deeper, something neither of us dared to name aloud, yet both of us felt in every fleeting touch and glance. Once the last cushion and rug were in place, we paused in the living room, leaning against the doorway and the back of the sofa. The room, once just a space for family gatherings, felt smaller now, intimate in a way that made every movement and every breath feel heavier, more significant. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting soft stripes across the wooden floor, and the air smelled faintly of lavender from a nearby vase, mingling with the warmth of our shared presence. "Thanks for helping," one of them said, her voice soft, casual, but carrying a note of something warmer beneath the words. Her eyes met mine briefly, then flicked away, and I noticed the faintest flush on her cheeks, as though our proximity had affected her as much as it did me. The way she spoke was gentle, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world, and yet, I felt every second stretch and linger, drawn out by the quiet thrill of closeness. The other woman leaned against the arm of the sofa, her expression relaxed but attentive. "It's been a while since we've had you around," she said lightly, though I could detect a tinge of curiosity beneath the casual tone. Her gaze swept over me, as though measuring the changes that had come with age, with experience. There was an appreciation in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that made me self-conscious yet somehow proud. As we chatted, the conversation drifted from family anecdotes to more personal stories. I found myself listening harder than I spoke, noticing the texture of their voices, the slight tremor when one laughed, the careful cadence when recounting a memory. Occasionally, our hands brushed as we adjusted items on the table or leaned forward to emphasize a point, and each touch felt alive, charged with a quiet energy I struggled to name. At one point, the woman who had asked me first sat on the couch, tucking one leg under her, and gestured for me to sit beside her. The movement was casual, but my pulse quickened when our knees brushed. She smiled, just a fraction, enough to make me feel the warmth radiating from her body. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, subtle but intoxicating, a gentle mix of floral and something warmer, almost like sunlit skin. We talked about mundane things, work, summer plans, old friends, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken dialogue. The pauses between words felt pregnant with possibility. Our eyes met in fleeting glances that lasted a heartbeat longer than politeness required. When she leaned slightly closer to reach for a cushion, the brush of her fingertips against mine left a tingling warmth that I couldn't ignore. I became acutely aware of their presence, the graceful tilt of a head, the soft sway of a smile, the gentle pressure of their hands against furniture that seemed to reverberate against my own. Each subtle motion drew me in, creating a quiet intimacy that felt both thrilling and grounding. By the time the conversation meandered to a lull, I realized that the simple act of sitting, talking, and moving around the room together had created a space far more intimate than I had expected. It was a space where small gestures, casual touches, and quiet words held weight, and where the beginnings of something deeper had taken root, something that neither of us had to name aloud for it to exist. The afternoon stretched lazily, the golden sunlight slanting across the living room, catching dust motes in its warmth. We had been tidying and arranging items for a while, and I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of our movements, lifting a cushion here, adjusting a rug there. But then, in a small, almost imperceptible moment, time seemed to slow. It happened when a tray of glasses tipped slightly as I reached for it. Before I could react, one of the women moved instinctively, her hand brushing against mine as she steadied the tray. The contact was brief, accidental, yet the warmth of her skin pressed against mine lingered long after our hands separated. I felt a sudden tightening in my chest, a rush of awareness that made my heart skip, not out of fear, but from the closeness, from the delicate intimacy of the moment. "Careful," she said softly, her voice low and almost hesitant. She smiled, but it was different this time, less playful, more deliberate, as if she, too, felt the charged quiet that had settled between us. Our eyes met for a heartbeat, and I noticed the subtle shift in her expression, a mixture of calm confidence and something softer, something vulnerable. I wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but all I could do was nod, my throat dry, my senses suddenly heightened. As we straightened the tray, the other woman stepped closer to help, leaning slightly over my shoulder to guide a glass into place. Her arm brushed mine lightly, and I felt the faint brush of her sweater against my forearm. The sensation was startling in its simplicity, the warmth, the soft texture, the weight of presence, and it left me momentarily breathless. I realized that even the smallest contact between us now carried a gravity that had not existed before. We paused then, standing in the middle of the room, our hands still near each other, as if unsure whether to step back. The quiet was almost deafening in contrast to the usual hum of conversation at family gatherings. I could hear the soft exhale of their breaths, the subtle rustle of fabric as they shifted, the faint clink of glassware in the background. Every small sound seemed amplified, every small movement imbued with meaning. I became acutely aware of my own body, the heat in my chest, the tension in my shoulders, the fluttering of my hands. I noticed them too, the way one woman's hair fell gently over her face as she leaned forward, the subtle curve of the other's wrist as she rested her hand on the edge of the table, the quiet steadiness of their eyes as they watched me, gauging, waiting, but not pushing. There was hesitation in the air, a mutual awareness of the unspoken. Neither of us wanted to disrupt the fragile balance, yet neither could ignore the quiet pull drawing us closer. I wanted to linger in that pause, to feel the softness of their presence, the gentle heat of proximity, the delicate tension that hummed invisibly between us. It was a moment that demanded patience, awareness, and restraint, but it also marked the point at which the ordinary began to slip away, replaced by something deeper, more intimate, and infinitely more thrilling. By the time we moved again, adjusting the last few items in the room, I carried with me the echo of that pause, the memory of fleeting touches, of shared breaths, and of a tension that promised something more, something unspoken yet undeniable. The day, once ordinary, had begun to bend toward quiet, tender possibility. After we had finally finished organizing the living room, a calm quiet settled over the space. The afternoon sunlight had softened to a warm, honey glow, and the house felt unusually intimate, as though it had shrunk to cradle just the three of us. We sank onto the couch together, not because it was necessary, but because something about the day had quietly drawn us closer. The first woman leaned back, tucking one leg beneath her, and sighed softly. I could hear the subtle tremor in her breath, a mixture of relief and lingering tension, and it made me suddenly aware of how small, human, and approachable she could be beneath her poised exterior. The other woman rested a hand lightly on the armrest, fingers brushing against mine, and I felt the lingering warmth of her skin, soft and grounding, almost like a tether to reality. "I haven't had a moment like this in years," the first woman said quietly, her eyes distant yet present. She didn't meet mine at first, and I noticed a slight falter in her smile, a hesitation that made my chest tighten. There was vulnerability there, raw and unguarded, and I felt a protective instinct awaken inside me. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers, but I stopped, afraid of overstepping, yet unable to look away. The second woman's voice was gentler, comforting. "We all need someone to notice the little things," she said. Her gaze lingered on me briefly before drifting to the other woman, a soft, shared understanding passing between them. Even in this simple observation, there was a depth of emotion that resonated with me, a quiet recognition of loneliness, longing, and the subtle ache of unspoken feelings. For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty but heavy with presence. I became aware of their breathing, the steady, almost rhythmic rise and fall of their chests, the warmth of their bodies so close to mine. One of them leaned slightly toward me, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, the movement gentle, deliberate, intimate in its simplicity. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the soft warmth of the couch, making my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. Then, almost imperceptibly, our hands found a momentary connection, fingers grazing as one of them reached for a cushion. The touch was light, fleeting, yet it carried weight, as if the universe had compressed everything we hadn't said into that single brush of skin. My heart beat faster, but there was no rush, no expectation, just the quiet understanding that we were sharing something fragile, private, and undeniably human. The conversation resumed in whispers, almost a dialogue with time itself. Stories were shared, laughter surfaced, and small confessions tumbled out, memories of loneliness, dreams half forgotten, the quiet longing to be truly seen. Each word, each glance, each soft brush of a hand built a connection that transcended the ordinary, a bridge between age, experience, and the tentative stirrings of affection. By the time the sun began its descent, casting long, golden shadows across the room, I realized we had crossed a threshold. There was no dramatic gesture, no overt declaration, only the subtle intimacy of presence, the unspoken acknowledgement that something meaningful had begun. In the warmth of their proximity, I felt a quiet, unshakable sense of trust, of connection, and the first, tender bloom of something deeper than friendship. The room had grown quieter as the day waned, the late afternoon light painting everything in warm amber hues. We lingered on the couch, no longer moving items or arranging cushions, just letting the weight of the moment settle around us. It was a silence that spoke louder than any words, a shared awareness that the ordinary rules of friendship and family gatherings had subtly shifted. I noticed the small, intimate ways they were close to me without touching deliberately. One leaned slightly forward to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture gentle and unassuming, yet my awareness of it made my chest tighten. The other shifted her body just enough that our knees brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a small thrill through me. Each movement was casual, almost accidental, yet it was impossible not to feel the intimacy of proximity. Their voices returned, soft and unhurried, discussing plans for the weekend, reminiscing about shared memories. But beneath the casual tones, there was a deeper dialogue, one woven through glances, pauses, and the subtlest of smiles. I found myself reading every gesture, every breath, searching for meaning in the spaces between their words. There was a quiet understanding in their eyes, an acknowledgement of the tension that hung lightly between us. At one point, the first woman reached for a cup of tea on the low table. Our hands brushed as we both grabbed for it, and the touch lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. The warmth of her fingers against mine was soft, grounding, yet charged with an unspoken awareness. I felt my heartbeat quicken, and when I looked at her, I saw that she had noticed it too. Her eyes met mine, and she offered the faintest, almost shy smile. It was a smile that spoke volumes without saying a word. The second woman leaned slightly toward me to point out a spot where a rug could be straightened. Her elbow brushed mine in passing, light but deliberate. The contact was brief, yet I felt the echo of it in my chest, a reminder that proximity carried meaning now. I realized that the simple act of sitting near them, sharing this quiet space, had become profoundly intimate. Each movement, each glance, each accidental brush of skin was charged with a tension that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. I became aware of my own hesitation. Part of me wanted to speak, to acknowledge the fluttering warmth in my chest, the pull I felt toward them both. But another part of me hesitated, conscious of boundaries, of the age difference, of the social complexities that had always kept this attraction unspoken. Yet in that quiet moment, as the sun painted golden patterns on the floor, I understood that the feelings were mutual, soft, careful, and unhurried, but undeniable. We didn't need to say anything. The touches, the lingering glances, the subtle shifts in our position spoke for us. In that shared silence, I felt a profound acceptance of what was unfolding, the recognition of desire tempered by respect, of connection deepened by trust, and the quiet thrill of realizing that something more, something tender and enduring, was beginning to bloom between us. By the time evening approached, the tension had settled into a gentle warmth, a realization that this bond we were forming was not fleeting, but something delicate, beautiful, and entirely ours. And in that quiet, golden light, I felt it clearly, our hearts were beginning to understand one another in ways that words could never fully capture. By the time the sun had fully dipped below the horizon, the living room was bathed in a soft, golden twilight, the kind of light that made everything feel quieter, more intimate. The house had settled into a calm hush, and with the chores complete, a different kind of closeness lingered, a warmth that wasn't just from proximity, but from understanding and shared vulnerability. We sank into the couch once more, tired yet content, the rhythm of our breathing slowly sinking in the soft stillness. The first woman shifted closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for a moment, our knees touched again. The contact was light, accidental seeming, yet it carried the weight of everything that had passed between us that afternoon, the fleeting touches, the silent glances, the mutual acknowledgement of emotions carefully kept in check until now. The second woman rested her hand gently on the armrest near mine. It wasn't a bold gesture, but I felt the warmth radiating from her skin, the subtle pressure that made the space between us feel charged yet safe. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee and sunlight, and it made my chest tighten pleasantly. In that shared quiet, the three of us existed in a world apart from expectation, apart from age and propriety, in a bubble of subtle intimacy. We exchanged smiles, small, knowing, unspoken acknowledgments of the connection that had grown throughout the day. Words weren't necessary. Every glance, every light brush of a hand, every shared breath carried meaning. It was the kind of intimacy that didn't demand labels or declarations but existed fully in the moment. I realized that I was profoundly grateful for it, not for the excitement, but for the tenderness, the human closeness, and the mutual understanding that had developed between us. One of them shifted slightly, resting her cheek against my shoulder in the gentlest, almost casual hug. The warmth of her presence, the steady beat of her heart beneath her chest, filled me with an unspoken reassurance. The other leaned forward, draping a light arm over the back of the couch near me, and I felt the dual embrace of comfort and subtle desire, balanced with respect and care. It was a moment suspended between friendship and the first quiet stirrings of romance, intimate yet safe. I reflected on the journey of the afternoon, the accidental touches, the quiet pauses, the stories shared and vulnerabilities revealed. It had all led to this serene point, a mutual recognition of closeness that was emotionally profound and fully human. We had crossed a threshold without words, our hearts acknowledging what our lips did not need to say. As we finally rose to leave the room, there were lingering touches, a hand on a forearm, a brief hug, a soft smile that held longer than politeness demanded. The connection was undeniable, yet gentle, leaving behind a warmth that would linger long after the moment ended. Walking toward the door, I realized that the day had transformed from a simple family gathering into an experience that redefined my understanding of closeness, affection, and subtle desire. The bond we shared was not just a fleeting attraction, it was a tender, enduring warmth that promised care, understanding, and the quiet joy of being seen. And in that final, lingering light, I knew we had all felt it, a beginning that didn't need a grand gesture, only the quiet acceptance of hearts quietly, profoundly aligned.